slideshow. There we are. Okay. Anyway, so welcome everyone. For anyone that doesn't know me, I'm Chantal Homan. I'm the Service and Quality Manager for the CAM service, but also the Autism Assessment Pathway, which is just sits slightly separate to CAMS. And I would have been doing this today with our lovely Laura Rowan, consultant psychologist, but would you believe she decided to take some annual leave? So you've got just me. Anyway, so we're going to be doing some slides around supporting social skills. It's a massive area, so hopefully we've kind of condensed it down into a half-hour slot with some kind of high-level overview, and then hopefully some kind of helpful hints and tips of where we can start and get going from, okay? So just thinking about social skills, you can't think about social skills without thinking about communication. The two absolutely go hand in hand together. And we know that effective communication is the foundation of social skills. And if you think of all the kind of non-verbal stuff, and you think about, even from, babies in terms of making that eye contact with their mothers and fathers or caregivers, that is that communication, and that is the development of those social skills. We know that effective communications, lots and lots of different and many distinct skills, a bit like what I've just sort of shared with you. It's actually kind of a really sort of complex layer of a multitude of things in terms of kind of environmental, facial expressions, posture, non-verbal bits, verbal bits, etc., etc. And that social communication is truly kind of like a language within its own right. And like with everything, children are born with differences in their strengths in this area and their kind of needs for development and learning this language in this area. And that's all children, whether they are children, young people on this autistic spectrum or not. We absolutely know there's a nature-nurture element of it. So temperament totally and utterly plays a part in this, but then so do our kind of environmental factors play a part in this. And that tells us then that we know that social skills absolutely can be taught, and social skills absolutely can be learned. There's a lot of research and evidence that tells us that around that area. So if we're thinking about our social development and trying to kind of break that down into different components of what that is, these next two slides are really sort of built to give you a bit of an idea and an overview of that sort of a hierarchy and some of the components that are within that, which might help to explain for our young people that do struggle in this area, a bit about kind of what they're battling with to be able to take it all on board, process it, and then, exhibit it in behaviours. So social development, as a minimum, is going to contribute to things like non-verbal communication, being able to interpret it, but also being able to engage in our non-verbal communication appropriately and accurately, being able to express our feelings. And there's a part about being able to express our feelings in a way that others around us understand, but also in a way that is appropriate as well. So we kind of learn really early on that sometimes when we are having there's feelings of anger, sometimes they can come out in quite destructive behaviour sometimes. And, we need to be able to kind of modify that to be able to express it appropriately so that we can get it out there in a way that is understood and can be managed by others as well. Social development is also about caring about yourself and caring about other people, because then that's that kind of motivation really to want to engage. Being part of a group, whether that's your family group, your friendship group, your community group, your religious group, your spiritual group, your school, there's so many different groups that young people and adults become a part of. Just realised a spelling mistake there, obviously deliberate. And then being able to problem solve. Relationships are tricky, aren't they? They're really tricky. They're tricky for us as adults, relatively kind of like experienced in it. And being able to kind of problem solve about what that is, particularly, I think for young people on the autistic spectrum are having to kind of battle with that bit about, well, they say that, but their behaviour is that. And that's really quite a lot to kind of get your head around. The bit that we often hear adults talk about being a bit of a problem is that kind of two-way street, reciprocal conversations and that listening skills for our young people. And then the two at the bottom are really similar, but slightly, separate in terms of that bit about being able to stand up for yourself, that kind of assertiveness skills that we have within our social development and within our relationships and friendships. but also kind of that bit about being able to manage conflict when it does arise, because it absolutely does arise, whether that's in your friendships, whether that's with teachers at school, wherever that might be, it does arrive. So that's that bit about, you know, being assertive enough to stand up for yourself, but also having the skill set to be able to manage conflict when it does arise, when there are differences of opinions and things like that. So when you see it on a slide like that, I think what that helps us to remember is that we talk about social skills and we talk about it really quickly, but when you break it down, this is a massive area for our young people to sort of get their heads around and start developing within. There is, I put here the hierarchy of talk about, and talk about is a series of workbooks really with worksheets that Alex Kelly, who's a speech and language therapist, has developed throughout her whole career. And certainly when I was a bit more kind of hands-on within my nursing career, it was like the go-to kind of Bible really around developing social skills for young people. Started off as a series of books to help adults with more moderate levels of learning disabilities, and it's been transformed and transformed. And what Alex Kelly talks about within one of her earlier books is this kind of like hierarchy really of things that need to be thought about when we're thinking about social skills. So it's very similar to the slide I've just given you, but it's that bit about, you know, first and foremost is this awareness of self and others. And obviously that develops right from the moment a child is born into the world in terms of an awareness of the, you know, the attachment that they start having with their caregivers really, and that bit about, you know, what they get from their caregivers, initially food and comfort and all the rest of it. And you start developing this sense of yourself and connection with another person. You know, I cry, I get food, that kind of really early on. Awareness of communication, how that works, you know, how what I do engages other people, how what they do engages me. It's obviously a lot more than that, but these are just sort of overviews. Non-verbal skills, both interpreting but also being able to use them yourselves. Then your levels of verbal skills, which often comes into reciprocal conversations when we're talking about our young people with autism. And a bit like that slide previously, some bits around kind of assertiveness skills of being able to kind of know who you are, that confidence in those relationships, to be able to manage those conflicts and to be able to kind of say, actually, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I need as well within that, okay? So I was thinking about kind of which to pick on and which should we do first, which should we look at, and I was thinking about friendships, because I think this is the area that most young people will say that they struggle with, and our young people who, you know, are particularly articulate are able to really explain to us at times, you know, the impact of them around relationships and friendships. And it's the bit that most often I think comes up for parents and carers about their worries for the children around, you know, having friendships, fitting in, that sense of belonging. So thinking about that in terms of our children, young people who are on the spectrum, we know that they can be difficult to establish and maintain for lots of reasons, and these are some of these. So obviously understanding emotions like we've been able to touch on now, and reading those non-verbal cues. And that's that bit about, you know, we all get something out of friendships and relationships, don't we? And if the person that, you know, the person on the other end is finding it really difficult to understand that you're sad and upset and need some comfort, you know, they will go and seek that comfort elsewhere. And it's not necessarily as a negative emotion to the individual that's not giving them comfort, but that's why it can be quite difficult for a young person on the spectrum to kind of maintain that friendship. Bit around knowing what to say in a conversation, you know, because sometimes we're not that interested in the other person. And I think one of the wonderful things that I love working about with our young people with autism is this, that honesty about not really that, you know, I'm not really that worried about it. So you kind of have to learn to be worried, to be able to then know what to say to somebody. Something we hear a lot about is about young people talking too much about their interests. And for the person on the other end, that can be really overwhelming if they don't have that same interest in that area, or as deep an interest in that area, or if our young person is struggling to move on to a different subject for even a short period of time. Sensory overload, we know, is a massive thing. We know that's huge for our young people. So in terms of kind of maintaining those friendships, if you're in an environment quite often like a school classroom where you've got such a lot going on, you're preoccupied with all that other stuff to then also be able to think about the effort that you need to put into kind of maintaining that friendship and that conversation. Social motivations I've just spoken to you about before, you know, I'm not really that bothered. So, you know, the motivation is harder to find. And also a really key thing, you know, all those things are, we talk about, are kind of bit more related to the young person with autism. But I think it's really important to think about actually the duty that we all have about understanding our strengths and needs, really. So, you know, friendships and relationships can be difficult because, you know, if I'm a young person with autism, I might be trying to have a friendship with somebody who really struggles to understand what my strengths and needs are. And therefore, they also equally struggle to understand what to say to me into a conversation, how to read my nonverbal cues and things like that. And so I guess it's just remembering in all that we do, yes, absolutely social skills can be taught, but we need to make sure our young person realise that it's not all on them, that we as adults need to role model the fact that we need to learn how to engage with them as well. And it's a two-way street in that way. Does that make sense? So the rules of friendship can also be really difficult to understand. And again, they kind of continue to be difficult to understand as we get older as well, don't they? So we know there is a sense of kind of informal versus formal behaviour. You know, we might be a bit more formal with individuals that perhaps we're only just getting to know, we haven't known for very long, or they may be acquaintances rather than friends. And then you have your more informal behaviour with people who are more friends rather than acquaintances. And that's a nuance that's really difficult to figure out, isn't it? Understanding personal boundaries. So that is around kind of obviously physical personal boundaries, but also information kind of personal boundaries. We don't necessarily need to know all the information about individuals. And sometimes, you know, we can have a little bit of a challenge around oversharing sometimes, or sharing with the right people. Sharing with a friend and giving space, that can be really challenging as well. I'm sure you've heard families talk about before with a young person who maybe finds it really hard. They've got a friend in school and they just really, really struggle with this kind of overwhelming emotion that happens to them when that friend wants to spend time with another individual. And the young person with autism taking that as a kind of personal attack, really, when it isn't. Being able to get attention in positive ways, because we learn really early on, don't we, about how our behaviour gets our attention. And, you know, it's inevitable sometimes that behaviour that is more destructive or placing us or others at risk, or is needing to be addressed, is likely to give you attention much more quickly than other aspects of behaviour. Dealing with peer pressure is really difficult. That's another whole set of rules, isn't it? And we know for certainly our older children and then young people, social media is starting to come into that. And then that element of kind of being able to have those really, really nuanced skills and sophisticated skills about being able to compromise, negotiate, share, join in, turn take, things like that. And winning and losing can be really difficult to understand within friendship. So, you know, when you keep breaking it down, I think what I'm wanting you to go away with as kind of parents, carers and caregivers really is an understanding of just, you know, it's not just about a young person not wanting to do it. It's a big skill to learn, and we've got a responsibility to kind of break this down and really help to think about it for them, rather than, well, you know, they've got eye contact and therefore why not type thing. Okay. So that's just sort of another bit really to sort of put it into other areas of why falling out with friends can be quite common. So a little bit too rigid with rules sometimes, and not being able to negotiate around that, and that kind of literal understanding of the world and managing change as well. I won't go through all those because I think a lot of them I've already spoken about, but I just think there's probably nothing on there that hasn't come on as a surprise, but there's also nothing on there that is any more important than one of the other areas as well. And it is about kind of our role as adults of sort of being able to kind of see how this all fits into a young person's world, really. So thinking about conversation skills, which again is so important when it comes to friendships and relationships, and what it's like for the person on the other end of our, on the receiving end of our conversations, but also what it's like for a young person's self-esteem, developing self-esteem in terms of being able to succeed in conversation skills, to be able to want to continue to try again and to be able to get something of benefit from it. And when we're breaking it down, again, we've got skill sets around starting conversations, you know, what's your opening gambit, and ending conversations. How do you know when a conversation's naturally come to an end? How do you read those social cues? How do you manage when a conversation needs to come to an abrupt end, but it's not quite finished and you know you need to pick something up later down the line? So all those elements of it. Listening distance and fits in with our tone of voice and our volume. Some people can talk really loudly, some people can talk really quietly. Also, some people kind of talk in a bit more of a monotone voice and they don't have that kind of natural ups and downs, which can keep the listener interested and clue them into what's being talked about. Introducing yourself actually can be really hard. It sounds like such a simple thing, but having the confidence around introducing yourself, we know that taking turns in conversation can be really hard, because I'm sure we've all been on the receiving end of a conversation where it has been very one way, and it's been quite hard to kind of get in there. Giving background information so that the person you're talking to understands what you're on about, but without giving too much background information that the person on the receiving end has sort of, you know, lost a bit of interest or drifted away before you got to the point you're wanting to make. Staying on topic, so particularly for our young people who are maybe a bit more impulsive in their behaviours, in their thinking. And then that kind of assertiveness skills a bit around that confidence of being able to ask questions when you don't understand, but being able to know that you don't understand what it is you don't understand, and then being able to formulate the question in order to get the understanding that you need, okay? So, gone over those bits around the different components of social skills, bit more in depth around kind of friendships, relationships, bit more in depth then again thinking about conversation pieces, how that works and the different components of that. So moving on to that, thinking then about the sort of, you know, the practical bit really, about where, you know, what do we do around this? And the good news is that there's lots that we can do. There is loads out there on the internet. There's loads of research out there, as I said earlier, that says actually we can teach social skills and social awareness. So starting with the awareness bit, you know, we do need to have an awareness of ourselves and other people to be able to kind of guide our interactions with them. So if we're thinking about that, we're thinking, you know, what does that mean? Who am I? You know, am I a boy? Am I a girl? What do I like? What do I dislike? You know, what clothing do I like? What do I feel comfortable in? You know, who is my identity really? And once you kind of know that about yourself, or you're developing that about yourself, then you can sort of, you know, transfer that skill to be able to noticing others. You know, so what do other people in my house like? You know, do we all like hamburgers or is it just me? Do we all like to do the gaming or is it just me? And being able to kind of, you know, describe the interests of others in order to be able to kind of evidence the awareness that we have of others and that we're kind of taking note of others. You can often start with thinking around that in terms of, you know, quite often our young people on the spectrum have favourite characters. And so, you know, part of what you can do is start thinking about this with people or characters that are important to them, that have a meaning to them. And favourite characters are often the easiest way in. So, you know, what is it about, you know, quite often Thomas the Tank Engine comes up, you know, so what is it about Thomas the Tank Engine? What do you like about him? What do you notice about him? You know, what colour is he? What colour are his eyes? Who are his friends? You know, kind of having those types of conversations. But also you can then broaden that out into, you know, thinking about my, you know, what does my mum like, my siblings, what makes me different to them, what makes me the same as them. And that goes on to that bit about being, you know, just kind of being able to notice people is quite a skill, because once you start noticing people and start noticing the differences about them, then you can build on that and thinking about noticing their non-verbal cues, noticing their facial expressions and things like that. One of my favourite things to have done when I used to be very much more hands-on and when cafes were open, would go and sit in a cafe and people watch. It is one of the most enjoyable activities ever. You have to plan it really well because you have to think about the sensory aspects. You've got to choose the right cafe, you've got to choose the right time of day, you don't want it to be busy, you don't want it to be too quiet, things like that. But actually, if you plan it well and you're kind of really clear about what we're going to go and do, and you've done a bit of practicing beforehand, it's amazing. But it's also really amazing to hear what young people come out with and the things they notice that you've never noticed. I've learned a lot. It's fascinating. The other bit around it is modeling it. And this is that bit where sometimes as adults, we can feel really self-conscious and feel a bit kind of a bit like we're overacting, but overacting is good. Okay, really good here when we're trying to just raise awareness. So overacting that bit about, you know, oh, I've just had a coffee now and my face is like this because I don't like coffee, and my face is going like that because actually, you know, this is saying that I don't like what I've just tasted there. Okay, so that's what I mean in terms of modeling it, of really helping young people to point out, you know, when you know that perhaps you're sat there and you're fidgeting, of saying to them, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm really fidgeting, and the reason I'm fidgeting is that I've been sat here for so long now and I'm getting a bit bored. Those sorts of things really is stuff that comes up in everyday conversations, beings, family time, etc., that you can do. The more you model it and the more you use those kind of natural opportunities for learning, the more it doesn't feel like you're having to, like, you know, literally plan out going and sitting in the cafe and doing it. So use those natural opportunities. The other bit, moving on, so thinking about body language. So once we've got that kind of awareness aspect, we're thinking about body language. And again, massively overacting it, massively modeling it, naming what you're seeing. So, you know, we're in play, for example, and we've been building some Lego. And, you know, while we're doing the Lego, I'm saying, I think you're happy because you're smiling, or I think you're cross because you've just thrown that toy down on the table, you know? So really kind of naming, you know, I see this happening and I'm putting it to this emotion here. Those sorts of things really, and using those natural opportunities. And then again, you know, once you're kind of moving on from that, saying, how do you think I'm feeling? Because I'm frowning, you know, and sort of really, really constantly asking those questions. Lots of people watching again, but this time really thinking about and looking at what they're doing with their body. So gestures, you know, are they kind of talking with their hands? What does that mean? Have they got fists like that, or have they got hands like that? You know, their posture, are they standing tall or are they kind of bent over like that? Things like that, those little nuances are really important for our body language, and really difficult at times for our young people on the spectrum to kind of be able to pick out unless we're really overtly pointing it out for them. Within that as well, noticing how close people are together or not. A bit hard at the moment and we're all 2 meters apart, but you know, when life returns back to some sort of normality, thinking about, you know, those two people are standing really close together. Do you think that means that they are familiar enough with each other for that? Those two people are a bit further apart. Why do you think that is? So just getting this idea about kind of, you know, body language and distance between people. Really good way of doing it is using magazines, photos, TV programs, all of those things. And you can, you know, particularly for our younger children, building a book. So, you know, pictures of mum, dad, you know, close people, family, friends, or what have you. Pictures of them smiling, pictures of them frowning, pictures of them crying, pictures of them sleeping, and literally kind of you building like a scrapbook of pictures that says underneath, daddy is smiling, daddy is happy. You know, those sorts of things that, you know, if you can start putting in from a young age, really, really help. Or, you know, daddy's, I don't know, there's a picture that we used of my daughter with me eating an ice cream, smiling, and we kind of built from that, mummy is happy, she is eating an ice cream. And so you really sort of then build on that skill that says, I know she's happy because she's smiling, and she's smiling and she's happy because she's got an ice cream, and you're kind of connecting those thought processes. And then, you know, you can also, you know, as your son or daughter or your young person gets more proficient with this, thinking about extending the skill. So when we talk about scaffolding skills, we talk about kind of building that base layer of skills. And then once we're really confident that our children have that base layer of skills, we think about, right, how do we extend it? What's the next sort of development in here? And for this one, for example, it might be sort of saying, Does their body language match their words? So they're saying they're really happy. You know, you come home from school and you say, have you had a good day? Yes, great day, thank you. And, you know, my whole body language and tone of voice then tells you that, yeah, all right, I've said I have, but, you know, I don't really think you have. And why is that? You know, you can do role play to help to extend that skill as well. Practical bits in terms of managing conversations and learning some conversation skills is really practicing and breaking down the skills to be able to learn them. Don't kind of go in with thinking, you know, right, we're going to practice conversations today. Go back to the slides. Which part of the conversation piece do we need to start learning first of all, and breaking that down? Again, watching others, but watching it with a different element this time. So, you know, watching others having a conversation. So what's going well about that conversation? How do we know it's going well? What's making it go less well if it does seem to be a conversation going less well? You can do that in coffee shops. You can do that in family situations. You can do that whilst watching TV programs or whatever it is. You know, whatever is going to engage your child to do that, use it. And if a young person does have a particular topic of interest, start with that, use that, you know, use what's going to motivate them. Role play is where we start coming in here, which always makes me get a little bit wibbly wobbly, but it really does work. And it's a bit about planning out a scenario and then giving a young person a chance to practice that scenario. So it may well be, I don't know, a young person's first day at school, for example, and they're worried about how do they do that bit around introducing themselves when they're going in to meet new friends. So practice it, you know. So okay, so let's give ourselves some key sentences that we know that we can use, like, hello, my name is Chantal, and starting with that. And then what do we expect the young person to sort of say back, and, you know, the different scenarios, but getting them to really think about not just what you say and practicing that role play, but how does it feel? Because the other element of a conversation piece is being able to keep the conversation going whilst also managing your feelings. And your feelings might be anxiety, might be pride because you've done it. It might be irritability because it's not going your way. Things like that you also need to be able to manage about yourself in order to make the conversation go well. And that takes time. That takes time for all children and young people, probably adults as well, you could argue. Other things that are really good are timers. I'm a massive fan of timers and kind of introducing boundaries and rules in conversations. That's okay to do that. You know, so saying, okay, I appreciate you want to talk about, I don't know, whatever it is, Winx fairies, what my daughter's in on at the moment. That's all we hear about. So that's great that you want to talk to me about Winx fairies. I'm going to listen to you for 5 minutes about that. And then after that, we're going to talk about this. Okay. And then being really clear on it and sticking to the boundary. It's not going to go well. Of course it's not. You're never going to get to talk to what you want to talk about straight away after that 5 minutes. But if you don't start introducing those rules early, you're never going to be able to kind of get them embedded and kind of move on from there. And again, that's where you need to scaffold your young person. I put 5 minutes, could be 10 minutes. You might know your young person and say they've got to get it out for 10 minutes before I've got a chance to bring it back. But once you've nailed it at 10 minutes, then do 9 minutes, then 8 minutes and things like that, okay? Most important, you know, and I'm sure you would do, but please, please, please praise for every single bit of this that your child, son, daughter, young person is learning and doing, and really notice that. Notice it. Even, you know, there might be times when you set aside, like, right, we're going to practice this, we're going to go to a cafe or whatever, and we're going to do this role play. You know, do it then, but also at times when they've just said to you, I've thrown the Lego because I'm really cross, you know, try and resist the bit that says, yes, but you shouldn't have thrown it at my head, and stick with the bit first of all, saying, thank you so much for telling me that was an amazing skill that you have just been able to tell me that you are cross because you've thrown the Lego. That is fantastic. Then move on to the bit that says, however, please let's not do it at my head next time. So don't have to forget that bit. Just get in with that praise bit first, really, because the better we feel about ourselves for getting it right, the more chance there is of us kind of continuing to engage with it as well. And this is hard. All the skills that we've just gone through, in the short amount of time that we got now, hopefully has given you an idea that actually this is a complex area that is really hard. And so when young people do make strides in it, they have worked really hard to do that, and we've got to recognise that, really. I'm really conscious of time. So just to say, those are some of the other things to think about. I think I've probably covered most of them, if not all of them, through other parts in the slides today. And the last slide I just wanted to come on to, as I mentioned earlier, about kind of talk about. So this is just, if you are wanting to take something out of the library, do whatever around this, then I would say to you, in all honesty, the Talk About series, the series that I've always found most helpful within work. There are loads of them now, so look at them. But as you can see there's a Talk About for children and there's a Talk About for teenagers. So that would suggest you to maybe kind of start on those areas.
I think some of those